Okay, I see there's 18 on. I think there's a few more joining, so we'll wait for a second more. Okay, it's 2 minutes in. Can you all hear me okay? Just you just want to, I don't have the chat open. Hold on. We get that up. So yeah. I'm not, when I've got the slides presenting, I won't have the chat group active very much, but I think from Emma you can hear me. And thank you, Margaret. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning in some cases, depending on where you are. It's lovely to be here again for the second session of this introduction. I just wanted to just see if there's a few people more joining, but this, as we said, I think there was some great, I felt quite inspired after last week, a lot of great suggestions and input. And there was a lot of, it seems that there's a lot of ideas circulating among people, which is really fantastic. So I think that was a good start. And I'm sorry if a few people had some technical issues. And I've decided we won't do another breakout room this session, but we will have time for, I'm hoping, as much interaction as possible in the second half. So I'll again go through the presentation, and then I'm hoping to have some really helpful input. Okay, so without any more delay, I think we'll get going. Let me just get the slideshow going. Hold on. So there we go. There we go. Okay, so can you all see? I think you can all see my screen. Um, okay, there's a few more people still joining. And I see I've lost my chat room. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead. Please shout if there are any issues, and Fola, let me know if I'm missing something on the chat. I can't, my chat seems to have gone silent on me. So, okay, so I'm going to dive straight into this second module. Great to be here. I know Fola is at the Africa Media Festival in Nairobi, amongst other people, and I know that there is a vote underway for an election watch which they're presenting. So please, if you haven't seen that, go and have a look at that to support. There's some voting, I think, is underway at the moment. Okay, so back to the environmental investigation, some great ideas, as I said. So I'm going to go through these presentation, and then we'll deal with questions without a breakout. Okay, but first of all, sorry. Just to go over again, this again is an introduction, by no means comprehensive, and the idea is to really get people thinking about how they're going to do the investigations. And then I've just shared this slide again for what is coming. So the next one will be on March 11 and 25 with Peter Aldous, and then it will continue towards the end of July. So the biggest thing to know, and this is more about the how. Last week we did the introduction on the content, what types of investigations. But I will touch a bit on some more ideas because of the wonderful ideas generated through Emmanuel and others. So I will introduce a few of those also as well today, because I thought they were so great. But yeah, the most important thing is obvious. You are kind of the investigator. It's different to journalism, news reporting, where you are reporting what is happening and you are trying to make sense of things. But with investigative journalism, you really are trying to connect the dots. And you become the investigator. You are it often in this case. And that's why investigations can be very challenging. So just a broad idea, I've just given some kind of a definition. Investigative journalism is original, in-depth research that uncovers secrets or matters being hidden from the public. It takes time, persistence, and patience. And I think that is very key, and it doesn't suit everybody, and you really do have to take your news rush head off to deal with investigations. And I've juggled the two, And it is quite a challenge for some people, especially news-oriented people, results-oriented, high-impact people. They really can struggle with the detailed, the waiting game of investigations. So that is a key difference. The key principles are, as with journalism, verification. You can't rely ever on a single source or document. A systemic focus, you move beyond the accident to find the policy failure, and you're building on a hypothesis generally. And we'll talk about more about that just now. So just with, sorry, I'm just letting a few more, yeah, I think Pola's letting people in. Yeah. So just in terms of, I just wanted to share a few, put down on a slide some of the ideas that you came up with after the first session, which I thought were really great. So I've just put them on a slide. The one was the fast fashion mapping, the textile landfill in Africa, where the journey of secondhand clothes from Europe to Africa and who is responsible. And I've just shared a link to a Mongabay investigation, which dealt with that. And I think it's got lots of room for further probes. So that was a really good one. Cocoa production, generally, I mean, being Europe being the biggest importer of cocoa, there are lots of issues around that and sustainability. And I've just shared what I thought was quite a good resource because it was the Food and Agriculture Organization, but there are obviously many. These are just some of the tools that you can look at. And then a really great one was on the idea about the used car market in being dumped in Africa. And I think that was helpful. This was an investigation I've shared here on exactly that in 2023 with Ghana and Nigeria the focus. But there's again lots of room here for exploration further. So there were great ideas. There were also some ideas on waste dumping and waste, and also, which I think is very important, is the whole issue with data centers and power and AI. With the development of AI and data, there's this mad rush for data centers in Europe and elsewhere. And one of the questions asked in the session or on the WhatsApp was, you'd like to know how the mineral breakdown of data centers. And I just did a quick look on the WEF site and saw this component breakdown, which I thought was really interesting. So those are the big three are aluminium, cobalt, and copper, and also gold. So those are just to get you into the flow of just immediately finding the answers to the questions you have. Look at the credible resources around you to actually access the information you're looking for. I also want to just pause on AI generally because I've done quite a bit of work with the M20, the Media 20 of the G20 on information integrity. And we did quite a lot of policy briefs and discussion papers on AI, particularly how it impacts Africa and how Africa is such an unequal partner in AI on all levels. And I think this is a fantastic area of exploration for people investigatively. And I am just sharing a link to a policy brief that was done by an expert, Scott Timka, about that AI in journalistically should be seen as a story about power, not about tech. And then journalistically and investigatively, there are so many lines of exploration. And just to feed some ideas, if you look through those policy briefs and to just see the kind of discussions and the power imbalance with AI on all levels as with the global south. Okay, so I won't pause too much here, but there were two groups that didn't get to feedback from last week, and I just wondered if anyone wanted to just put their hands up and have a quick report back. There were two groups. Is there anyone from there who wants to just have a go? And Fola can just let them in. Put your hand up and let's have a go. They're all. Is there anyone? Let's just see. I can see the chat. Been looking into how the big. Oh, good. I see Charles has been looking into how the big AI companies are moving. That's good. Good. Okay. Does anyone, you could just mention on this chat if you want to have a report back quickly from last week. There were the two groups. Otherwise, I'm going to continue. But I was very, we didn't get to everyone. Anyone? Not immediately? Okay. So I'm going to just carry on for now then. And we'll get into discussion later and you can do it then. But I also would like Emmanuel and the others to report back on any, fleshing out the ideas. Okay, so now we go back to the how. And these are, there are many ways to skin the cat, and a lot of different editors have different approaches, and everyone will find their own space. And I don't want to preempt, obviously, what you're going to be doing in later sessions. Um, but I just wanted to, so we just go through some of the techniques, and I think if you could get anything out of it, the idea would be to actually go and look on those sites and start learning how to navigate different tools for investigation, because that is often you can be shown how to do it, but then it's actually the application. So after today, even when you see some of the tools, I would really recommend that you go and actually try them out and really get to grips with some of these tools. So I just wanted to go back to the deadly banned pesticides from Nigeria, that story that we did, I mentioned last week with Jennifer Ugwa. That was what that was the investigation that she did, and it developed into a bigger one. And that was her piece, which we showed last week. And basically, how she did it. So, I mean, I'm not going to explore the whole thing, and I haven't worked with Jennifer myself, but she did a really good interview with the GIJN's Patrick Egwu. And I've shared that link where it does give you some really good steps of how she did this investigation. And I'm just going to highlight a few things that I thought were useful. The obvious thing is that she felt she wasn't a data savvy expert. She didn't feel like she could do it on her own, so she actually got an expert, a data savvy expert, to help her. And that's often step number one, is actually learning what is it that I need to get the outcome I want. And then they scrape data from the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control in Nigeria. And that looked at how these imported pesticides come with the required standard for information, etc., with all the details. And that's how she eventually came, obviously a long route, and we're not going to go into all the details, but she basically then she found that these products were still on the shore, on the store shelves, and they were basically banned in the countries they were made, but they were being flooded in Nigeria. And that's how she sort of launched into her investigation. This is the article from the GIJN where it gives more details, and you can actually read it to get more a deeper look at what she did. And basically, what we've discussed this in the session one is she exposed the double standards. Sorry, I've now jumped in there. She exposed the double standards, which we discussed in the first session, and basically that many of these chemicals that basically are not allowed in Europe are actually being used in African countries. So I think that is a very good example. And I just wanted to pause here. This will come up later, but one of the tips, it's the obvious one, and you all know as journalists, but you can never be told too often because you can't get this kind of information back. If somebody deletes or decides they don't want something in the public, or they regret doing something or saying something, the first thing they're going to do is erase, erase, erase. And so tip number one really is to record everything immediately. Immediately do screen grabs. Don't wait a moment. You need to have records of everything journalistically and to protect yourself, but also you need to have all that information. So and then it was interesting that actually Ugwa raised this when in this article she said that the NAFDAC actually deleted pesticide information on the website. That scared her, but thankfully the original information was saved and backed up. So that's again very important rule in investigations. I've personally been with journalists. I've helped coach journalists who have lost information, and it's heartbreaking. It really is. It can actually ruin your investigation. Okay, so a little bit more about the methodology. We're going to, as I said, touch on these issues. So when you set out, you can ask yourself all these questions, and I'm sure you're all in that phase at the moment. So you're thinking of, how does your story serve the public interest? Why am I interested in this? What is it going to do? And what will the outcome be? Um, okay, I see Peter Aldos thankfully is saying yes, it's backed up on the Wayback Machine and got own screen grab. That's perfect, exactly. So there's ways of retrieving information, even though it's been kept there, it's been wiped. Okay, so we can have a more discussion about that later with Peter if he's around. So then you need to think, is it investigative in nature? What does it hope to uncover? And how will you approach the story? And as I've mentioned already, do you have the skills to actually go there, or do you need some help? And then you need to build that into your planning. You need to think time frame, deadline, funding, obviously. If you're in a newsroom, I'm not sure that's helpful actually, because often newsrooms are the last space for investigations these days because of the incredible resources required and the cutbacks. So often it is the freelance journalists or journalists on special projects who are doing, or a special investigative team that, then you're used to working with this. But the thing is, you need to build this in, you need to think about this in your planning. And I've drawn this from the Henry Khumalo Foundation pitch tips, because I've actually worked with the Henry Khumalo Foundation, so I'm familiar. They ask you to, when you're doing that, to think, what is the minimum story you can deliver? So like at the very lowest, this is what I think I'll be able to uncover. And again, we'll talk about the hypothesis and the need to change as well, which will be done more in depth later too. But the thing is, what is the minimum you can deliver? What do you think? And then what is the maximum? Like, if it really goes according to how I think and what I'm being, my whistleblower has shown me, or what my initial evidence is, this is what I can actually do. It's really good to have an idea of that. And then you also do need to think of the outcome, like where's it going to go? Who's going to publish it and in what platform? And that affects the way you plan. Okay, there's a lot of people. Mark Lee Hunt has done a lot on the hypothesis, and a lot on, and I think some of you have probably interacted with Mark, and he and some of the tutors here in the CCIJ are very equipped to deal with building hypotheses. But the thing is, you're looking at that. You need to, often in grant requests, they'll say, what is your methodology and what is your hypothesis? So the hypothesis is, very simply put, is what do you hope to reveal? What are you hoping you will get out of this? And then you look at the methodology. Okay, so now we have the lines of exploration. So once you're thinking of your hypothesis, you're thinking of your methodology. In that, you need to think, you need to plan. So as we've discussed here, cross-border collaboration, often together we are stronger. You will immediately have a much more impactful investigation, more resources, more brains on a story. It can be cumbersome, it's got a downside for sure, but it's definitely where a lot of impact. I've shown some examples of that high impact for collaborations. So, and then there's also, you need to think finance and budgeting. You can't just, investigations take money and timing and resources. And then a timeline, build up a timeline. You need to get to grips with spreadsheet data analysis. And I think this is where you can start, if you haven't done this already, to start playing around with different data and analysis. And then you need to look at your setup, like how are you working? What is the structure in which you're working? Are you working all in Google Docs? And we'll get to safety just now. But how am I going to store my information? How am I going to make it secure? What is the structure of my story plan? And I always put this in because often it's an afterthought. Right at the end of your investigation, you're suddenly thinking, but how am I going to present this story if I don't have visuals? If I don't have data, if I don't have infographics. And all too often, this often trips people up at the end, and then there's a scramble. And then a lot of the time and the effort that you've put into your investigation, and you've got excellent discoveries, it can not be showcased well enough if you haven't thought of how are you going to present this. And visuals are therefore super important. Of course, if you're doing it as a broadcast, that's what you're thinking about all the time. But often I find text writers, word-based writers, they're not thinking of that because they're so focused on the data and the investigation. We've gone into some of the research tools, and you'll obviously do more in depth. I just wanted a lot of this is a recap from the first thing, all the different access, just cast the net as wide as possible. There's just so many networks you can look at, and we can't possibly go through them all. And I think you need to also look at sometimes it's staring you in the face. Sometimes your tools are actually there and you're not even aware, like with your contacts. There's online resources, and module one, I shared some, and then there's so many again. There's the Bellingcat toolkit, and I'll go there, and then the BBC Africa Eye Forensics dashboard. I mean, this, if you look at it alone, I mean, it's a minefield. They've got this, and you can actually click in to all of their different tools for everything. Monitoring, satellite imagery, shipping, etc. So really, if you are interested in investigations, I would be looking at all these tools, well, especially the ones that are recommended, and see how you can use them as relevant to whatever you're interested in. So it's not you don't need to wait. It's the kind of thing you can start looking at right away. Then there's obviously the CCIJ's workshops, and they're all on the website. There's so many different workshops about the topics and the questions that we're asking today on environmental reporting and techniques and tools. So really do look at credible sources, the ones that you know. So these are obviously very, very reputable, and I would recommend you all look through those workshops. They give a lot of information for like security, ethics, as you've seen there, armed conflict, climate from the edges, all those. And then I think as we speaking now, I think there is Andy is giving a presentation on the global oil trade on satellite imagery. And then I've also just shared here the resource for all the different training that is taking place on this platform with the fund. So there's a huge wealth of documentation. Obviously, it is constantly changing, but we're not short of information. It's a matter of accessing and finding the stuff that's relevant for you. Okay, so now we go back to, for me as I'm a big believer in field reporting and journal, raw grassroots reporting and getting the heart of people or whatever it is you're writing about. And so even in investigative journalism, if you can get on the ground, that is the best place to be. Often it comes with more risk, and there's often a lot of security issues, but you really do need to think, how am I going to get as close to the story as possible? And if you get on the ground, you can't do journalism behind a computer. You can do a certain amount of journalism behind a computer, but actually the story will give, it has much more, generally will have, unless it depends on the story, but generally it's the authenticity of a story, the feeling that actually you've been out there to see what's going on. I see Catherine is asking me about the links. Yes, they are. I'll share the slides at the end with all the resources. So yes, they will be shared on the platforms. That will all be on your slide. Yeah. Okay. So it's the human touch, as again, it's the visual elements. So really do from the start think, how am I going to can I get on the ground? How am I going to get on the ground? And sometimes you have to time it according to certain strategic issues, but really it makes all the difference. Then throughout your investigation, you need to be thinking all the time of the ethical questions, the ethics of what you're doing and how you're doing it. If you've got a mentor or a trainer, it's helpful, or an editor who's hands-on, or if you've got an investigative editor. But if you don't have someone at hand, you need to actually be asking those questions yourself. Like what? And you need to be thinking all the time, what if? What if this happens? What if this? And have I done this? Have I actually ticked this box? Have I checked that this person's going to be safe? Have I checked that I am not revealing information that I shouldn't, that's going to cause harm? All those things are very important in investigative work. And this goes without saying, verification, just constantly cross-check, cross-check. Here's something, cross-check it. And then, I mean, the safety measures are a session all on their own. But just to start thinking about how to keep your data safe, how to keep yourself safe, how to keep your sources safe. It really is super important, and it's not to be messed with. It has very serious consequences. And just in that line, I just thought I'd share from the IPI. This is a recent report where they showed this. They said this was linked to environmental reporting, that there'd been at least 19 cases of threats and attacks against journalists in Africa between March and September. So this is just the reality in which we work. And sometimes it's not you as a journalist who's in trouble, it could be your whistleblower, but it's just to be mindful of this and to be prepared in the work that you do. Okay, so just on that, let's just pause here and please, please keep your questions. I'd like to explore some of the things that if your questions are coming, we can explore them at the end. So just jot them down and then we'll get to them. And also, as I'm really keen on having a discussion about the challenges at the end. So some of these things are very important is with whistleblowers and sources is safety and protection, as I've said. So consider the risks. You need to do risk assessments. Always establish a reason for anonymity. Sometimes you could be taken for a ride. We know that. Sometimes people have agendas and they're trying to cover up something that they're doing, and then they're going to try and bring someone else down. There's a lot of skullduggery going on. So you need to always establish like why, and is it warranted that this person is anonymous? And in the case of a whistleblower, usually it is, but you need to know that whistleblower. You need to get to know that whistleblower. So, and then in writing and in preparing a story, it's sometimes but because of the problem with anonymous sources, and you want to be believable and you want to be able to be authentic that this is a real person. So you indicate why the source is not identified. Obviously, in doing that, you're not going to give away their identity. But it's not enough to say an anonymous source. You need to give as much info as possible, but without identifying them. And you need to say they cannot be identified, even though you know it's obvious. Sometimes it could be that they just feel uncomfortable because often it's because they're not authorized to speak. That's as simple as that. Sometimes it's because they're facing some criminal charges or some disciplinary charge. You need to know what's going on. You need to know what those circumstances are, and you obviously don't reveal that. You have to weigh that all up with your editor. But you need to be as authentic. You can't also pull the wool over readers' eyes. So there's a lot to consider with sources. And then the most important thing is to never burn a source. It is so important to really think about the confidentiality. Someone is putting their trust in you as a journalist. They're putting their life on the line, and then you go rush off to the pub, and the first thing you do is like say, "Oh, I've just had this great info dump from someone, etc." So you can really, really, it's very tempting to talk about these things. You have to do so in a very safe space, and generally, it's only your editor who needs to know your source. You really don't need to share it much. I mean, there's certain exceptions, but generally, and there has to be trust. So nothing will happen without trust. So, and that works on all levels. It works on your level within the field and with your reporting, and it works within who you're liaising with for your story. You have to build that trust. Okay, so now we'll just get on to, sorry, now I'm losing my slides again, this thing. So you need to always look at how is my story developing? So you've got a finding, you've got a report, you need to map out what is missing. What do you need that will make the story? What are the elements that are needed here? And also sometimes things won't make sense. you think that, and then is there a smoking gun? And I also find that people often don't use the networks that they have. So if you're doing a specific story, go, if you did a story 5 years ago and you think it could be helpful, go and have a look at those sources and those contacts, because sometimes you'll be surprised that they do have a thread. And so cast the net as wide as possible. And always with the hypothesis, and you'll obviously do this more in depth later, your hypothesis could change. You cannot hold on to a belief or something that you think is the case when it isn't, and the evidence doesn't hold up. So you're constantly needing to adjust as you go. And you cannot, you're going to deliver a fake report if you hold on to it religiously, because it's not going, sometimes there's often more to it than meets the eye. Sometimes it'll be even bigger than you thought, which is great. I think that was the case with Jennifer. Her story just got bigger and bigger. And that's often the case. So you start with something small and it goes big. And thank you, Peter, is saying digital security is very important here. So source information, identity isn't compromised. Absolutely. And you need to constantly think of every source and how it's being used. Okay, so there's the common pitfalls. I'm just using this from, some from my experience, but also some obvious ones, but just always think about them. And this I've seen a lot of this in when I've been editing and doing some training on investigations, that records are not being meticulously kept. Like, your editor or your person, your line manager might say, I need to see this for myself. Where is this recording? What exactly did they say? That is a huge thing. What exactly? This doesn't, are you sure they said this exactly? And are you sure it's connected to the incident you're even talking about? And I've seen people mixing things up and actually talking about different events related, but a different time in something. And then you can blow your whole story out the water, because actually somebody will challenge you and then, will hold you to it. So not keeping meticulous records, keep it all in a safe space. Another big one with this is lack of right of reply. We'll go into it a little bit more in detail later, and what is right of reply and what is reasonable and all those kind of things. But that is something to really build into your planning. How long are you going to give people to respond, and what is reasonable? I also have experienced cursory research. I think that research, there is as you've just seen here, there is just so much information. We're suffering with information overload. So you need to sift the credible information. This is backed up with whatever your own investigation is. But in your research phase, you need to do the deep research. So even if you're doing a pitch for an investigation, don't just do like a cursory pitch. You're not going to probably get that. You're not going to get that. You're not going to be granted that unless you've shown that you're able to do research. So in any pitch or any brief that you want to your editor, you need to actually map it out and actually show what the research on something, and what's been done up to now, what investigations have predated yours. So, and often I've seen that the research is too cursory. And yes, Dissentia, the slides will be made available. Yes. And it'll have all the links. So yes, so those are the issues. And then the obvious ones is not connecting the dots. There's something missing. There's some failure there. What you're saying isn't supported by the facts. So there's an evidence failure. And you need to really weigh that up and see how, if you can't prove something, you will need to adjust. You will need to adjust. You cannot say something is a fact if you cannot prove it. So that is your job, and that's why these investigations often take so long and can be very draining. So also I've seen people relax with security and protocols, especially now with AI, you've got to be super careful, but also with your own security, your phone, how you store information, etc. Then AI is a session again all on its own, but the overuse of AI, it's just a research tool. You cannot rely on it in any way. I mean, you really cannot. And it's often easy to see when someone has. I mean, I think it's getting smarter and smarter, but you really need to use it. It's a research tool like Google. You really need to use it as that and not treat it as the Bible in any way. And always, it's a resource and it's a tool. And another thing, using AI to frame an article when evidence is lacking. I've seen this myself where people haven't quite got the evidence, but they've got a framework, and then they'll write like a first draft, but actually it's not actually there. Um, the actual work is not there. So the evidence is not supported by, because AI is often, unless you prompt it in a certain way, AI is trying to please you. So they're going to deliver. AI delivers generally. They'll come up with something. And sometimes the evidence isn't there. So and it'll be evident that your article, there's flaws. So it's not worth submitting that first draft, and rather do your own draft. That's my advice completely. So not following the press code, we'll go into that in a bit more detail. A lot of people, Peter is asking now, the slides, yes, we will have the slides after the presentation, like we did with the first slides, and it'll have all the links. So you don't need to worry about taking notes now or anything. Then exposing, and another thing that can happen is you expose private info, unnecessary confidential information in PDFs and documents that you have uploaded into your story that includes somebody's ID number or somebody's physical address, information that really isn't in the public domain and can be very damaging. And also it can be damaging for somebody who's done bad deeds, but they will use those kind of things to nail you. So just be super careful. And our CP Peter is saying Document Cloud is a very good for secure redactions of info in PDF. Yeah, perfect. There we go. There's a lovely tool for you. So thank you, Peter, to support investigations. Also make sure to import documents with OCR, which will scrub potentially identifying metadata. That is crucial. And I'm sure you're going to have a session in more detail. Peter, I think you might be giving that session. And those are crucial things to learn. Okay, so thank you for that. Okay, so in the last section, before we go into a discussion and some discussion and questions if you have any, will be the writing process. I just want to spend a few minutes on this because, as I said, you can't just think of your investigation. You've got to think, and I'm obviously as a writer, I'm doing it in writing, but it could be a broadcast. So it's not only about writing, but in this case, obviously my skills are in writing. So this will be where I will give taste, but a lot of it can be based on broadcasting because the same kind of premises is there. So basically, you just to remember when you're doing your investigation, you're going to be telling a story at the end of the day. And so you're a storyteller, you're an investigative journalist storyteller. So you're thinking of the most compelling way to get your message across, because at the end of the day, if you do a long investigation that has taken months, sometimes years, and then it doesn't have an impact, or it's not presented well, it's not told in a compelling way, then you're selling yourself short. I often find also that publications don't use big investigations well enough. They don't enhance it. You need to almost be your own cheerleader here and ram it home and make sure that your hard work is going to get noticed. And I know journalists often don't like to do that, and that's a whole nother topic. I don't like to do that, but I've realized that sometimes, there's so much noise out there, you've got to somehow get noticed and make that impact. So back to storytelling. So I'm just going to go through some common pitfalls in the writing process. Again, this is mostly from my own experience. I do quite a bit of training as well and teaching in writing and editing. And so I see sort of things that common recurrence of things, and also from years of news editing and being in the newsroom. So flat reporting is often, especially with investigations, you can get so bogged down, lost in the weeds with the data, and then you just deliver something that's flat. And yes, it's important information, but it has to be something that people want to read. And as again, so just keep reminding yourself you're a storyteller. You're a storyteller. You're telling a story about this data. And how can I make the story, this data fascinating? And that's a challenge. Um, and then so that's another problem is that people get lost in the weeds. I get lost in the weeds. You know, you can spend months searching something and having so much information, and then you go, oh my gosh, now how am I going to make sense of this? And then you start, everything's important for you. Every single bit of information, you don't know what to leave out, and you end up having a scrambled egg. And it's got to go through a process to get it into a digestible format. So these are the things that often happen. And then sometimes things are just meandering, and that's what put that little joke there. What's your point? Thing is, what are you actually saying? What is your point? What is your fundamental point in the story? And don't lose track of it. So, keep on it and tell a story in each line. Each paragraph the reader must want to go to the next paragraph. Quotes, I've mentioned this already, quotes not matched by evidence. Sometimes people will say something, but it's actually not a fact. So a person's statement is not a fact, especially, so be extra careful with investigative journalism. Getting AI to write up a first draft, as I've mentioned before, it's easy, but it's not going to help you. It really isn't. It actually can trip you up. Get your own information. So, and then overwriting, it's linked here to getting lost in the weeds. You can't write, so you write 10,000 words, 5,000 words. Often, the average now generally, I mean, you do sometimes get long form investigations, and hopefully you will have that space. But even then, you will need to divide the story up. And sometimes you can tell an investigation in a few words because it has supporting data and things. So there's a lot of techniques that you can use. And so that's a whole lesson on its own, which I'm always happy to talk about. But and also what I've also found common pitfalls is a passive email approach for interviews. It's so easy to send email questions to the people you're interviewing, but you're not going to get it. It's not an interview. That's getting information from someone, asking them questions and getting information. If you really want to get to the heart of something, you need to actually explore and interact with someone. I mean, obviously it's often, you can't always be done, but when it can be done, go there. And sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes it's an interview with someone you're challenging and you're confronting, but you'll get a better quality of interview if you actually go to the source and avoid a written text reply. And often probably happens more in news journalism where people are in such a hurry that they just, send a WhatsApp voice note, say, please give me reply in 3 sentences this to my question. I mean, it's fine. It'll work as a, response to a budget or something, but it's not really helpful for this kind of journalism. Another thing that is often a problem is the lack of persistence with right of reply. Officials and government people generally don't want to respond. There's a lot of obfuscation. You need to make sure you've covered your tracks with a right of reply. We'll go into it in a bit more detail now. I'm just aware of the time. Yeah, we've got a few more minutes and then we'll get into a discussion. So you need, as I said, think of your publication and your format. And if it's a broadcast publication, that's also one of the options. Sometimes it will be a social media. I mean, nowadays things have shifted so radically. You can do good journalism on so many platforms. You need to think, what is it, the platform, and who is your audience? Who are you writing this for in the first place? Are you writing for a local Kenyan audience, or are you writing for a European audience, or a global audience, or are you writing for a very small local publication where, there's a lot of knowledge about something? So you need to be purposeful and intentional with what you're doing. So, and then you need to think, what is their level of understanding? The general, obviously it will differ, but just generally. And is it hyperlocal, regional, national, or international? Or is it a hybrid? Is it going to be, you can maybe do sometimes you could break your story up into 2 different, one for local and one for national. There's various ways to do it, but you do need to think about it because it will impact on how you do your reporting. And then this is a very, very granular thing to say, but it helps. If you got a publication, ask them for their house style, get to know it. So if you deliver a story that is got in the house style of a publication, I can tell you now from years of experience, it makes everything flow so much easier because the editor will think, oh my gosh, they've actually taken notice. Look how effortless it is. It's in the style. It's got blurbs. It's got headlines. Always have captions, that kind of thing. But ask, find out what the template or style guide is. And very important, what is the word count? You need to establish that because you can have real tears if your work is cut to fit a space. Sometimes if it's in a print, in a newspaper, which is rarer and rarer, but every now and then it happens. You might have two versions. You might have an online version and a print version. You need to know all of that because you want to be in control of your work. You don't want someone to come and take control. I always do this because I write and I edit. And I think it's very important if you're writing, just put on your writing hat and write. You don't want to be disrupted with little nitty-gritty worrying about words and things, or have I said this right? Let it flow. And then, but it's very important, you need to edit. You need to edit your own work. You can get guidance, but you need to edit. And nowadays, especially people, don't have, there's so few resources. So I do a class actually at Stellenbosch where it's basically self-editing your own work. And I don't, I see this as the same. Even if you're editing somebody else's work, you can, learn how to edit your own work. And then the important thing here is that it's an important step. You can't just ram it out and send it off. You need the time to craft, and crafting takes time. So that's, I think, a very important part of this whole process. And that's where you put on your, whatever you want to call it, sub-editors, copy editor, editor hat. And I won't repeat this quote, but this is from someone. I thought it was a really good quote about the importance of the unsung heroes in newsrooms, often the copy editors, but you can be your own copy editor. So that's just a quote there where it's basically what good sub-editors do and what you can do in your own work to sniff out something that's not quite adding up. And to keep the flow of a story. There's so many areas of importance here. So that is really an important part of your process too. And I'm going to need to move on a bit, but you need to adopt a style guide. A template from which to work. And often if you're working in a newsroom, you'll have one, but also just, I've used this one, The Guardian, because it's free, but also because it's live and it's interactive and it updates all the time. And it's just quite helpful that if I need something, even though it's British and it's not South African, and there's a lot of things that will be different, and some things I don't even agree with, at least there is something that I can refer to as now as a freelancer in my last year. Get the basic rights, that's obvious. I'm not going to go through all the questions you need to ask yourself. I'll share the slides, but these are the things you can ask yourself, Easy ways to get rid of repetition, but need to think about it. Sometimes you can actually do a word check on an adjective, and you might find you've used the same adjective like 5 times. I mean, you should never use an adjective more than once. So sometimes you can do those little tests yourself, and you'll see, you might be surprised sometimes of your repetition. I'm a big one in quotes. Quotes need to be used with intent. You don't want long reams of quotes, which is just a cut and paste from your transcription of your interview. Your job is a writer. You're a storyteller. Right of reply, Decentia. Right, ROR is right of reply. So if someone's asking that. And Peter is saying AP is the standard for style in the US. Absolutely. And that is useful, but the one that I looked at was behind a paywall. So if that link is not behind a paywall, that's fine. But some people the Guardian one is the British one, and yes, not free. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, so it does put some people off, but yes, if you can get that for the US, that is the global standard. Even in South Africa, people look at the AP one, although we generally adopt British English style. Okay, so yes. So sorry, yeah. So the quotes, sorry, I'm not going to read you the slide, but so quotes use with intent. Use passive, go into indirect speech, use it purposefully, let it flow. You don't want to lose the reader with these big chunks of repetitive information. Okay, then the 5 C's is your article: clear, consistent, correct, complete, and concise. Just easy way. Do the checklist yourself. It works for me, and it helps you to think of these different processes. Again, every word counts. Keep tightening, tighten and tighten, and but also let things flow if they need to. Like often a survivor's tale, somebody who's telling a survivor account, the last thing you want to do is clip them. You want to hear them. So there's a reason in doing that. Okay, so everything has a reason. The intro, always say it's such a cliche, but read it out aloud, and you might be surprised how it doesn't gel. Gosh, it actually isn't working. Um, there's a lot of trips around this, but remember the intro and the headline, which you often don't have control of. Hopefully, you have control of your intro. You need to make it work. It needs to capture. It needs to grab the person. They want to read on. And often it's in the detail, not the generic. The generic is why would I read something that I've heard so many times? And all too often news reporters do that. Everyone, they're not thinking, you've got to sometimes get down to the little detail that will bring that story to life. Okay, so the press code, South Africa has a very press code linked to our Bill of Rights and our Constitution, and it has a right to freedom of expression, but not hate speech. And you'll look at that. There's often the subject of discussion, and we won't be able to get into it now. But you need to look at that last one if it's advocating for hate speech and inciting violence. It's only hate speech if it's also inciting violence, and that's often a conversation that happens in a newsroom about to let something go or not. Okay, I'm not going to go through these questions, but you've got them and you can get these from all of your press codes. I've just jotted them down here. Lots, conflict of interest, a big thing. Disclosure for sponsorship. Your article will be dead in the water if you've had something that you haven't disclosed and you should have, or if sometimes you need to think, is there a conflict of interest? Legal checks. At what point are you going to bring in a lawyer if you need one, etc. And are you covered ethically? Are you satisfied? I've circled this. Have I included hyperlinks? It's a great way to keep copy tight for online publications, but also to give the attribution and the context so that you are totally covered in what you're saying and that you've attributed and that people can get more information if they like. Okay. And then the SPJ is the leading. Yeah, we're getting some great tools here, Peter. Thank you very much. So please keep looking at the chat box with some extra input, which is very helpful. Okay, right of reply. What is reasonable? I'm going to have to move on because I don't want to take up too much more time. But you need to think, what is a reasonable time? And you need to think, have I actually let them know what? You can't just give a bland one-liner question. You have to actually tell them what you've uncovered. And you have to weigh that up in terms of timing. And every now and then there'll be a very reason not to, because of fear of going to court. There's a lot of things that happen, but generally you have to give a right of reply. And you might not get a response. And at that point, you've got to decide when to publish regardless. So there's a lot at stake with investigations, but build that into your planning. Just some helpful one-liners. Show, don't tell. Always. It's such a cliche, but honestly, it really means something as a writer. You must do the work for the reader. And so especially with adjectives and especially with things telling people what to think, rather actually show them. I mean, I know it's cliched and it's tiring. A few more things: follow your gut, listen to that little voice. If in doubt, leave it out. Sometimes it's not even an important bit of information. And if something is not crucial, please just rather leave it out or talk about it to your editor. But sometimes the article can do without it. And the last thing you want to do is put something in that's going to trip you up. And Peter, very clear, yeah, keep records of your attempt to get right of reply, follow up calls with emails referring to messages left and kept those sent emails. Exactly. Even if you don't have time if you want to keep your article tight, you can't give the long detail of your route to get right of reply. You'll have to give some explanation to the reader because they deserve to know, and you need to keep those records. Sincere. Okay, we'll get back to Silas's focus. Yeah. And then I just wanted to end with this, just to, get into the mood again of what it is that we're doing, with a quote by Chinua Achebe. One of the truest tests of integrity is its blunt refusal to be compromised. So at the end of the day, you are gonna be hitting a lot of challenges, and you need to just know when to just push on. Okay, so now I'm going to just close, I'll share these slides. There's the references all there, which you'll get. And now I just wanted to close the slides and get into a report back, and also to look at some of the challenges and what you see as the challenges and how you'll overcome them, bearing in mind you're going to be having a lot more practical intervention. And so maybe we'll just kick off while I close, stop sharing here. Thank you. I think I can see everything. Yeah. So thank you everyone for indulging me. Let me just get this off. There we go. So maybe to start, I'd like first, let's just talk to Silas's question. And then if you want to put your hand up, or I should be able to see. I don't know where Fola is. I can see how this goes. If I should be able to see you, but Fola, I think, has to let people into the room to speak. So let's just see how that goes. And then I would like Emmanuel to also just maybe speak a little bit to some of the ideas that are coming in from the group that she's formed, which is great. So Silas asks, the focus has been on the efforts to get facts and presenting them, anything about the safety of the investigative journalists, and some of the information may lead to meeting aggressive and violent sources. And how do we go about it? Okay, so I don't know if we want to share this. Would someone like to, I see someone's in the, would someone like to share some wisdom on this issue? Anyone put their hand up here to share some ideas around, because that is a huge part of the work you do, is on the safety issues. So is there anyone who wants to contribute something? I think it'll be good I think you've heard a lot from me for an hour. Who would like to have a go? How do you go about getting aggressive, from information from aggressive and violent sources? I can't see if anyone's got their hand up. Fellas, does someone have their hand up?
I think people can
Okay. I think
just
Charles.
unmute
Charles.
just unmute themselves. All right.
So I think Charles had his hand up. If you could open up. No? Fola, sorry, I'm missing that.
No, I don't think I had my hand up, no.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay. No, so it does work. Okay. So Lungelo is saying no story is worth dying for. That's absolutely true. So you do need to see the source in a crowded place if possible, says Caroline. Good idea. You do need to consider where you're going to see that source. That's vital. And you don't just go off and see a source without planning, especially if somebody could be hostile. So those are all very important, in your planning, and you do a risk assessment, and you work it out with your editor, and you figure out how. Sometimes you'll figure out is it necessary to get that person or not. I see Tulani had his hand up. Hi, Tulani. I think you just need to unmute.
Hi, Janet.
Hi.
Well, I wanted to say what you finished off with, that you need to do a risk assessment well before you go into the field. And you also need to discuss it with your team or your editor on the planning, the pre-planning phase. before you go into the field. How I believe the gentleman's question was asking about the method of how to go about collecting the information from the hostile source. So I think all that information goes into the pre-planning phase when you're doing your risk assessment. Thanks.
Perfect. Absolutely. You know, there's a long, I know at the HNF there, and Tulani, you would have been through this, I think a few times now, and with various other networks. I mean, Tulani and I worked together recently on a mother tongue literacy investigation. So I know Tulani from HNF, and there was a very thorough risk assessment that is done, which is very detailed. And it actually looks at scenarios and possibilities that you have to go through to make sure that the ground has been covered to be as safe as possible. So there's, you know, that is an essential part of the journey that you're going to take. And Peter has just shared a link to the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJs, on resources on security. There are workshops on digital security that are available through the CCIJ and other networks. And so you can become, if you don't have the luxury of a project editor, and you still are looking at the level of risk yourself, you could go to sites like the CPJ and also to various training manuals and actually develop a map for your own security. And all newsrooms have their own different security risk assessments. And I mean, and this applies not even only to investigations, but also to journalism. So those are the kind of the tools that you will, you know, so that is, there's a lot available. It's just, and you will sometimes have to weigh up whether it's worth waiting. It's the timing. You'll work, and you have to sometimes figure out whether to approach somebody who might be hostile before or after you've got info. You know, so you have to weigh up a lot of these scenarios to try and make sure that, you know, you are as safe as possible. And sometimes you wouldn't go alone. And often it does help to go in teams. And it gives you have a backup. So you need to always think of a backup. Is there anybody else who wants to talk about security and any other ways to be secure? Okay, anyone else? I don't see a hand. Does anybody want to ask any other questions, or any other input from the you know, anything else that is pertinent or troubling? Peter has raised his hand. Peter, go for it.
I hope you can hear me. On digital security, I generally find that that's something my students are not great on. Just a few things to think about. I think we often think about communication, so people are probably like using Signal or other encrypted communication devices. We think a little bit less often about the security of our physical devices. So we may think about the security of online resources, but we think a bit less about the security of our physical devices. If everybody doesn't have all of their drives encrypted and protected with a strong passphrase, you should do that, and you should do it straight away. You should do it for, you know, your internal drives on your computers, and you should do it for any external drives as well. You want, if your device was seized or got into the wrong hands, you want to have it useless to the person who gets it.
Great, thanks, Peter. That's very good starting point advice, and I think you know, there's so many. I think you're right in terms of what that people you've got to think of if your computer gets stolen. How will you be affected, and how will other people be affected? So
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? This could reveal your confidential sources. You know, you can be cavalier with your own security, but if you're an investigative reporter, you're dealing with other people's security.
Thank you, Peter. And you can't rely, I mean, newsrooms do have techniques but it's sometimes I don't think they check vigorously that it's being enforced or applied. I think sometimes there are loopholes where, I mean, journalists, sometimes you'll say, I'll get to that later. I'll do that tomorrow. I'll go and get that encrypted. It's too complicated to do now. I'll do it later. And I do think that, later could be too late. I mean, and there's a lot, I mean, in South Africa, for instance, there's a lot of theft. There's a lot of people's computers, I'm sure in a lot of countries that there's criminality, which they might just throw your device and not worry about the data. And they just want your phone, but you just never know. And so you do have to you've got a responsibility to safeguard the information. And then someone is Emmanuel, who she's saying, would you advise resources to learn more about digital security? I need to learn almost everything about it. There was a briefing. I don't know if it was public. It was the Nieman reports. And the Nieman. I'm involved in the Nieman group, and there was a briefing just last week. Peter, weren't you on it? Were you not presenting? No.
Oh, I was not.
Okay. So there's a good start that's been shared from Wired, a guide to protecting yourself from government surveillance that Peter has shared. So, one of the things this group could do, I don't know how it's going to map out, but you could share more resources on a Google Sheet together. You could, I think that's a good way where people can share tips and share advice. You all available to set up your own networks and how you're going to navigate collaboration. So one of those could also be to set up a Google Sheet where you could share some more information and some more helpful tools. And Peter is saying that he can share more digital security resources in the WhatsApp later. Great. And in fact, maybe that WhatsApp group is a good one to just keep that running. Okay, thank you. So security is, I don't think from the agenda that it was a specific section of exploration, but we can all help to share some tried and tested resources. I mean, and I know in the US it's become it's become one of the big issues. Whereas other countries have been dealing with that for some time. Okay, as usual, the GI, there we go. And Emma is saying a basic answer, but as usual, the GIJN has a good starting point with links. Absolutely. And there will be some of the links I shared will also have some workshops, videos, presentations, if you want to go through those. Okay, so I just want to ask Emmanuel, if you wouldn't mind just maybe just saying what's happening?
Hello. Thank you very much, Janet, for this such useful presentation. Actually, we have not done a lot till now. We just we are 10. Three people from Nigeria, 3 people from French. So it's not very representative. And we just had time to introduce ourselves. I thought we needed to discuss the subjects I proposed because it was just ideas and very open and very vast ideas. That didn't happen, but I made a survey so that everybody could choose a subject or 2 or more, so that we could make maybe 2 groups, as we are 10 people. And the group, the subject that is emerging, the one that has the more people interested in, is the subject on data centers and their impact on data mining in Africa. So I think, well, this is going to be one of our main work, and it's really for me the next step is to dive into it, but also to find an angle to our research because it's so vast.
Yeah.
And to ask ourselves all the questions you just asked before and see. So, of course, we have to list all the data centers. I mean, we have to know what is the situation in Europe, what is the situation of mining in Africa, have ideas of that, what are the metals. Thank you for your help, Janet, on that point, that are involved in data centers, and what are the impacts. But this is extremely vast, so we really have to think about and find how to tell the story and a story that would interest European public, African public, and have an impact. So that's the next step, I guess.
Okay. No, I mean, I think, Emmanuel, that is a very good topic. It is very broad, and so I mean, if you like, so basically, you know, but I think that's the thing, to do the research, and it's a different ways that in this case, it's a collaborative idea, and there's no like, you haven't got the actual topic, so you don't have the smoking gun, you don't have the, you know, you're still looking, but there's plenty, I can tell you now, there is plenty to explore. And that's the thing, to look at the lines of exploration. And that's also why I shared that AI brief on the policy brief with the M20, because there's a lot of exploration. And I mean, that's just one example. There's a lot, I mean, in the various African networks are exploring the unequal nature of how these data centers and AI is just perpetuating this terrible divide. And what it means for Africa. So there's a lot of potential of lines of exploration. And the important thing is to think of AI, as I said, as a story about it's the power and how it affects. So for African newsrooms in Africa to take the, you know, to start really thinking of it, not because people are obsessed with the tech side, like getting to grips with all these tools and all that. Instead of actually as a story, the story of AI is the story actually of this decade, of this moment. So I don't know how much investigative work is being done at the moment on data centers and AI, and Peter would probably be a better place to provide an answer there. Or anyone else, does anyone know how much investigative work has been done or is being done? It seems to me it's a wide open field still.
Yes, absolutely. For me, what is at stake on such a subject, working with all of you, I mean, from Europe to Africa, or from Africa to Europe, is to make it human, as it's really virtual. I mean, we always talk about it in a virtual, we talk about a lot the virtual impacts on our lives, on our mind, on the jobs, but we don't talk a lot on the impacts on environment. This is not such a big subject in media, I think, in France, and I think all over the world. So we really, I mean, we could do something about it. So to make this environmental impacts of IA real, to make them real.
Okay, yeah, no, so I think that's I mean, I think you've hit on a good line. I am available for, you know, a couple of hours after this training sessions if you want me to help in any way with exploration, just to shoot ideas off, you're welcome to hook me in on a meeting. I'll be very happy to do that. Exploratory, obviously. Just to, if that can be of any guidance, I'm very happy, and I'm sure some of the other tutors are also around. Is there anybody? There's a lot of good stuff that's coming on these chats, so please do take them down if you're interested. And someone has asked about a WhatsApp group. There is a WhatsApp group. You should all be on it. And otherwise, you can ask Fola. There is a general WhatsApp group for this this project. So you should be on that WhatsApp group. If you're not, just let Fola know and she'll add you. Okay, thank you, Emmanuel. Does anyone want to add in terms of ideas and possible challenges? We've obviously security is one, protecting sources, protecting your data. Anyone else want to contribute some, maybe an experience that somebody has had that will be enlightening or helpful in terms of this discussion? I would really like to hear from some of you in terms of what your work involves or what your lines of interest are, where you're going. Anybody else? Will the messages in this discussion be saved somewhere? I don't know if Fola has a way. I don't know how to do that. Fola was hosting, and I think she's dropped off because she's at the festival. Let me see. I'm not sure is the short answer. I'm not sure. So maybe if someone can jot them down, put them on the WhatsApp group, that would be great. Save the messages. There we go. Okay, Peter, please all do make sure you're in the WhatsApp group. I'll be sharing info for my sessions, including software you'll need. That's very important. So you need to make sure you're on the WhatsApp group. And thank you, Emmanuel. You saved the messages. I can share them on the WhatsApp group. So we sorted there. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, the WhatsApp group, anyone available? Okay, so I see CCIJ is the host, which is great. So I don't know, Fola, if you want anything to add at this point, and then we'll go. I would like to just hear from a few more people, if possible, that will add to this conversation. Challenges, experiences, anything come to mind. It can be small. It can be something that, or maybe the thing that concerns you most about getting going. Anyone? I don't see any hands. Okay, I don't see any hands, so everyone must be feeling overloaded or sort of a lot to think about. I think, okay, here's some. Okay, so what do you share? Okay, Catherine's asking, okay, I do not have any answer. You will get a message from Fola. I'm not sure if Fola, are you on this? Are you on at the moment? Okay. Pollution stories are difficult to sell to an editor. So, Caroline, are you not able to speak to elucidate for us? Because you say you're in a crowded place. Are you able to just come on board for a second just to...
Well, hi. Sorry. I hope you can hear me. No, I was I guess if we all here is because we're really worried about pollution and we'd like to do more about that. But I found it, at least in the French press, it's not really a topic editors want to buy, or they're always afraid you're going to get against interest of the advertisement business, etc., and it's not fun. And so I don't know, there's no answer to that, I know, but I was just saying that's difficult. That's a big issue, I guess.
Does anybody else find it similar? Have you found it difficult to get exposure to these stories, or to get buy-in for the stories? And I mean, I think that, I can only talk from personal experience, really, for myself. That in South Africa, it was, environmental stories generally there was, like 10 years ago, they were like there were very few environmental journalists, and in fact a dying breed. You know, they were kind of sort of, there was just one every now and then. And then about, you know, in the last, because of, I think, the climate crisis, things have shifted and there is more awareness and there is more funding for this type of story. I think the newsrooms, but often they fall below the priority list in newsrooms for sure, and they're often not prioritized on websites. That's definitely something that needs work on as a general comment. At the previous publication I was at was Daily Maverick. I left there last year, and they had set up a special, actually an entire desk called Our Burning Planet, which was specifically to cover this type of issue, including pollution. So it had to be a concerted strategic shift in thinking to say, you know what, we can't carry on like this. We can't just relegate it to an every now and then story. It has to become a complete beat and funded, and it has to be given space and ring-fenced. I think it is a challenge, and I hear what people are saying. I think but I think that's what the challenge is. So you need to actually be advocates for the story. And again, you've got to go back to the why. Like, people don't want to read about pollution for the sake of pollution. It's why they should care, you know? So that's where you go to the heart of what the impact of this pollution is on people's lives and animals' lives. And that often is an easier way. It's not easier, but often it's a more compelling way. Emmanuel's asked, since the aim here is to make cross-border investigation, how to find subjects angle that could interest both publics, African and European. Very interesting, very relevant discussion. I think often very different, well, not very different audiences, but people tend to think in their own silos, and they only seem to read about something if it affects their community or if it affects them. And I think maybe in Europe, I don't know if it's more prevalent than in Africa. I think Africa generally is so used to being with the bigger story, and Europe, you know, it's much more, there's been so much information from Europe and the North that we are often, you know, we're more exposed maybe to different, whereas Africa is sort of often, and the global South struggle with access and struggle to be, you know, to get taken seriously. But I think that's why this specific grouping is very important. If you can, Emmanuel, develop your France-Nigeria connection, I think it's fantastic, because it will make it a more nuanced, dynamic outcome, and that, you know, you'll need to think of ways to get someone in Europe interested in what's happening, you know, in Lagos or wherever, or in a more remote place. But somehow the interconnectedness needs to be brought out. I don't know if anyone in the last few minutes has anything to add to that, because I think that is a very relevant area. Any experiences of where things have worked? You know, I did show some examples with the forever chemicals, but thinking about it, the one was very much a European media investigation covering Europe, and then the other ones were within Africa. So there wasn't a marrying really of what you are asking. If anyone has any examples of that, you know, intercontinental crossover for investigations, I'm sure Peter has had a lot of experience with the environmental desk and things like that, where there are a lot. Nothing comes to mind, but I'm sure they are there. But it would be good to share some more examples to make it more, to see what can be done. I would really be interested in seeing those examples. Okay, so Maria is from Nigeria. Hello, Maria. Hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Thank you for your wonderful presentation, eye-opener. Please, my question is, environmental investigations can involve powerful interests. How can journalists protect themselves legally and physically while reporting on environmental corruption? Okay, so yes, this is exactly it. And that's, I think, where people feel they're hitting a brick wall sometimes, even with their own editors, that there isn't enough buy-in to really interrogate stories. It does take resources. You do need to, often these are the most powerful networks and not popular and with huge PR machinery, massive, like, I mean, insane publicists and insane spin doctoring in Spain, corporate, branding that and it's powerful stuff and it can easily, there will be a lot of harassment. There's been a lot of written about, harassment of journalists. I mentioned the IPI report. Women particularly get targeted on social media online, especially when they take on the powerful, because those networks come into play very effectively and can be quite can have a debilitating or chilling effect on journalists. So, just easy ways. You obviously need to look at the legal implications and physically. Often these threats are online, the threats, but that's not that can lead to a physical threat. But the impact, it's still a threat. It is actually a physical threat online. And I think this is what's been coming through more and more, that it actually is a physical attack on you because it has an emotional impact. So you have an emotional response to being attacked online. So your harm, it is causing harm. It is harmful. So we mustn't underplay it, say, oh, well, it's just online harassment. No, it is a serious, it's the new way of harassment. It's a new way people get harassed. Well, not even new, but I mean, it's all the same. You can't remove the one ecosystem, the digital space from our livelihood, us, because we're living in it all the time. So, for freelance, Peter's saying that he would, you need to be very careful with wording on your contracts with news organizations so that liability on the event of legal threat isn't placed mainly on you. Very important. And Peter, thank you for that. I think that's an excellent resource. I haven't even seen that. If you can share it on the WhatsApp group, I'd like to see that. And I think that is, you need to protect yourself because especially for freelancers, they've often left high and dry. And there've been cases in South Africa, not with environmental journalism, but with people being challenged and they haven't had the backing of the publisher. So you can be very vulnerable. And I think that is, and Peter's saying that he's being sued. I don't know if you want to come in here as a parting shot, Peter, because we're winding up now. And he's saying it's for peace when he was on staff, very aware of the risks. Okay, so maybe it's a bit tight now to get into it, but maybe you can share that with when you do your training, Peter. But don't underestimate the things that can happen, and you entering. There is going to be a backlash, often with what you do, sometimes before you've published, in fact, often before you've published. So you need to protect yourself and have the mechanisms in place. It's a very serious, a lot of the grant, people like, I know HNF, and I'm sure CCIJ and the European Fund, they have a lot of mechanisms in place to safeguard journalists. But it's the first question you need to ask, I think. Well, not the first question, but it needs to be built in. And so with that, I think we're running out of time, but I thank you very much for joining. It's been lovely. As I said, I'm available for a little bit rather earlier than later, while it's hot, while your ideas are coming. I'm very happy to be a sounding board. And Peter is saying that now you're really giving us little tidbits. I was fine, but the case went on for a decade. So I would really like to hear more myself, Peter. I think that's fascinating. So I'm glad you obviously were okay, but I would love to know how you got out of that and if it went on for a decade. Wow. Okay. I do not have admin asks. What's this for? Oh, is that?
I'm just answering Catherine's question. I don't think I am able to put people into the WhatsApp. I think Fola has to do that.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Peter. And you'll obviously give your story now that we've been waiting with bated breath for more details. But
yeah, I won't take up the time now. But I can share. I've got a slide deck on it. I've got a story about it. I can share it in the. It wasn't environmental; it was actually a genetic testing story. But one thing I will say is, I think actually the powerful interests are less worrying from a legal point of view from the sort of maverick individuals who may sue you, even though they really don't have a chance of winning. But nobody wins a loss. Nobody wins a libel suit. Everybody loses one way or another. Costs, sunk time. You don't want to end up in court if you can avoid it.
Okay, thanks, Peter. And on that note, I think it's a good ending, because we do everything we do we need to be mindful and purposeful and know what we're going into. And one thing I wanted to mention is solidarity and collaboration and peer collegiality really goes a long way in this journey of investigative journalism, because it can be very lonely. So that's why this network is really important, and I hope you build networks as you go. But that for me is one of the big ways you can help to safeguard, because you're learning from each other, especially if you're a freelancer. So thank you very much, everyone, and I will be in touch on the WhatsApp group, and I'm available if you want to reach out, DM me, and we can see, in the next, if there is any need. Otherwise, the next session is in April. I shared the slide earlier. Thank you very much. Ciao. Bye.